Hello and welcome to WIF's Laptop Cinema Club, the series where we talk to the incredible filmmakers behind the media that you should be watching. Today I have the honor to share with you a conversation about an absolutely phenomenal film, Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America. It is an unflinching look at America's original sin. It is vital, affecting, harrowing viewing, and it will change what you know or what you think you know about who we are as Americans. Joining me to talk about this extraordinary film are directors Sarah and Emily Kunstler, and the film's producer, writer, and subject, Jeffery Robinson. Welcome. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Of course. So I want to start with something that has stuck with me after the viewing of the film, and I think this might be a particularly resonant image for viewers like me who are Black. It is not the bodies of lynched people. It is not the images of grieving friends, relatives, friends, but rather the image that keeps popping up in my mind is of the Black cops who use their own bodies as a bulwark against protesters protesting the statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And I just thought, what a compelling statement that underlines precisely how we are our own worst enemies and how the forces of the state are deployed against us and how we are used to uphold our own oppression. I couldn't shake that image out of my mind. So I want to talk about the film, whose very title is an indictment, who we are, not who we were, but who we are. So can you talk, how do you explain this project, this film, to viewers? You know, and let's start with you, Jeffery, as the subject of the film, but I'd like to hear from all of you. How do you explain what this is?
What this is an attempt on my part to make sense of information that I was reading in my 50s that I had never read before, and that I was embarrassed and humiliated that I didn't know, because I've had one of the best educations in America, Marquette University, Harvard Law School. And yet in my 50s, I'm discovering this information. And I have been trained and practiced for 4 decades as a criminal defense lawyer. And one of our techniques is to take complicated information and put it into a timeline just to see what it will say to you. And when I did that with this information that I was finding, I was blown away. It showed me step by step how we got to where we are in America. And what was so amazing is that so much of this information I had never heard before. And after I stopped being angry at myself and beating myself up and trying to blame my teachers and then thinking, how could they teach it if they didn't know it? I really started wondering how many other people don't know this, and what would happen if some of our myths about why things look the way they do today, what would happen if those myths got stripped away? And that's what this project is about, is stripping away those myths.
Yeah, I want to come back to that, this idea that you found this information in your 50s. You know, you're a very well-educated person, trained in critical thinking. And so you are, you know, having to push against both, you know, the deliberate efforts to keep people ignorant, but also the people who simply do not know that that information is out there. They have swallowed wholesale these myths about America. I want to come back to that, but Emily and Sarah, let me hear from you. Like, how do you explain what this project is?
Well, first and foremost, you know, we are fans of Jeffery Robinson, and this project was about getting this amazing presentation that Jeff put together out in the world. But I want to go back to what you were saying. It's called Who We Are, but it is about who we were. It's about who we were as a nation, who we are, and who we want to be. Right? Who we aspire to be, and how those 3 things are inextricably linked, and how we can only end up being the people we hope to be, the nation we hope to be, if we critically look at our country's past. Jeff talks about the timeline, and I know you're going to get back to that. But the thing about putting things in a timeline is that we have a very short historical memory as a country, as a people, right? So things happen, things happen and we don't have any historical reference for what caused them. We're like, why is this happening? Why, we're coming on January 6th again. Why did these people storm the Capitol? Why are people taking to the streets and so angry about the murder of George Floyd, right? And we look at the moment and don't have no historical context for how we got to that place. So that's what this film is about. This film is about, giving us that timeline and giving us that historical context and giving us the place, the space to examine how we got from there to here and how we go to the next place.
Right. Emily, what about you? How do you explain what this project is?
I think my hope is that it gives people an opportunity to really look at these issues, and gives people a moment to take a moment to do this investigation, and to think about these things, and to have conversations that are hard to have, and to think about things that are hard to think about, and to do self-examination that's hard to do. It's very hard to make the space and the time to do that because it's not a comfortable thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. It divides our nation, it divides families, so we wanted to put this film out into the world to give people a tool to begin to do that investigation for themselves. So that's really one of the hopes that I have.
So how do you even begin? I mean, doctoral dissertations are written on the period of 1800 to 1805, and it's just talking about, the use of the cotton gin in that period. But you're talking about this vast project, right? So how do you even begin to develop this? And Jeffrey, I'd love to hear from you as the person who, developed this presentation that so moved the Kunstlers. And then, Emily and Sarah, how you as filmmakers then take this presentation and, weave a compelling narrative that works as a film. But where do you start?
I started again with my training as a criminal defense lawyer, which is something that I read a long time ago, Descartes' Discourse on Method from 1637. And when someone asked me to read it, I thought, oh my God, this is going to take forever. It's probably in Old English and it's probably like 80 pages long. It's like 8 paragraphs. Mm-hmm. And one of the things he says very simply is, when you have a huge problem, break it into smaller pieces. And by understanding the smaller pieces, the huge problem becomes understandable as well. So what I looked at is breaking American history into chapters. Mm-hmm. And that was the kind of approach that I took. So what happened from 1619 until the Constitution? What was going on in American history that made things turn out the way they did? And then what happened from 1789 or 1790 when we went from colonial America to constitutional America? What happened from then until the beginning of the Civil War? That's about 80 years. And very different things were going on. And then the Civil War ended. Well, what happened as Reconstruction started until the turn of the 20th century? And by breaking it into these pieces, not only was it easier to understand, but the connections between what happened in the first chapter and what happened in the second chapter just came completely alive. And so that for me was really important in trying to understand what I was finding and to put it into a narrative that that people could kind of get and work with.
Mm-hmm. And so, Emily and Sarah, you see Jeffrey's presentation, you decide this needs to be a film, more people need to know about this. How do you then take that presentation and make it into the film that we have now? Because it could have just been simply a filmed, Jeffrey up on stage, right, for X number of minutes. That could have been.
It was much more than that, I'll tell you that.
No, but there's so much more. There's archival footage. There's interviews. There's wonderful stories that are interwoven. What was the development process like as you decided this is how best to present this information and present Jeffrey as a person sort of reckoning with this new knowledge and sharing this knowledge?
Jeff made it easy for us in a sense because he had done, at that point, 8 years of research into this material. So, he showed up with this amazingly produced PowerPoint presentation, not a movie, but it was a really lucky jumping off point for us. So the first thing we knew we needed to do was to put on the best presentation that he'd done so far, to redo the slides, to make the best version of a PowerPoint presentation that we could have, to put it on a Broadway stage, to get people involved who knew about theater and lighting and performance and really try to put on a show. And we did that, and we filmed it with 7 cameras. And, it was riveting. And honestly, that could have been enough. We could have just edited that together and put that out there, and I really think it would have captured an audience. But we had big aspirations, all of us, and we didn't just want to put out a recorded version of a PowerPoint presentation. We wanted to make a movie. So we knew we needed to bring something more into it, to give an audience member that cinematic experience, to give an audience member who watched it at home the same experience you might have if you were watching it in a theater, when you see a live performance. So to do that, we did a few things. One, we knew that we really wanted to include part of Jeff's story. We knew that was important very early on. People would ask, who is this person? Why am I hearing this information from him? Why should I trust him? Jeff comes across, Jeff speaks in a way that reaches people. He really brings everybody to the table. He's a very generous presenter, but we needed him to show a little bit more of himself. And after a while, he was willing. It was a process. It's very hard. Jeff's not. He was putting on historical presentation. He wasn't talking about his childhood. I mean, he touched on it actually even in his original presentation, but only as as a means to an end to tell a larger story. But we built a trusting relationship, and Jeff ended up believing in the necessity of involving some part of his personal story, only where it was relevant, but still, we thought that was important, and I think we're all glad that we made that choice now. And then we also traveled around the country with Jeff as he gave his presentation in different cities across the country, and everywhere we went, we'd speak with different people from local communities who would bring different stories from Jeff's presentation to life. So we can show the real world implication of the history implications of the history that Jeffrey was talking about. That, and then our archival research, trying to find different clips that people hadn't seen before, different images that were new, that would be thought provoking, and not the same old clips that people had seen a million times before. And then hopefully string that all together in a movie that made some sort of sense.
Very simple.
Yeah, simple. Yeah. Sarah, what were your concerns as you started to develop this one? What were your things that you thought this is, I think, the way that we should tackle this, or I want to make sure that we do this sort of thing?
Well, I carry a lot of the anxiety and the stress during the process. So, we each have our roles, and I feel like a lot of what I did was, all of these are great pieces. Every single experience we had filming, when we would go out and meet with keepers of history and memory who would share their stories with us, each felt more powerful than the next. And we began to feel this tremendous sense of obligation that we were that we were asking people to share their trauma, the trauma of their lived experience, but also their historical trauma with us. And how were we going to do that justice, right? How are we going to figure out a way to weave that into this in a way that honors the stories that people are sharing with us? So you know, how do we take this great talk? How do we take these amazing stories and, you know, this archival, we're finding Jeff's history, you know, I mean, you know, in the if we were to describe this as a boat that we were all traveling on, right, together, you know, then I would see, you know, Emily is the person who keeps the ship, who steers the ship. She's the person who, because really a film like this comes together in the editing room, right? We can pick out the different pieces we pick out. We can have these wonderful experiences. We can find this great material, but how do you put it together in a way that honors the material and has an arc of storytelling? And, you know, I mean, I can bluff that that's me and that I had the and that like I had the overarching sense of what to do. But, you know, I really do think, and Emily hates when I do this, but I do think that the credit of finding that magic and finding us the pathway through goes to her. I mean, you know, Jeff is an amazing writer. He pulled together this history and shares it in this way that is so generous, right? He welcomes you in, like even white audiences, Black audiences, audiences of all races feel like this is our history that's been stolen from all of us, right? And we can feel a collective outrage at the fact, you know, that we don't know this and we weren't taught this and this wasn't shared with us. And we can come together into a future where we shine light on this and we examine it together as a nation, right? So that's Jeff's brilliance, but the you know, how to turn it into cinema and to take these pieces, that's all Emily.
I really have to back that up because when I saw the first rough cut of the film, I was stunned. I was just like, what did you do? And where did you get this? And this is nothing like my talk. And I was just stunned at what it was. And of course, it got better and better and better as we went, as Emily continued with the editing process. So I am a legend in my own mind. I think, you know, I have talents and I think there's some things I do really well. I could not have done what Emily did. And without her skill and her talent, this film wouldn't exist.
How long was the editing process? Were you editing during, you know, the pandemic, you know, had the film been wrapped at that point?
Well, we actually started editing as soon as we started shooting. It was an ongoing process, and it because we're on, you know, Jeff would, before the pandemic was in New York part of the time and in Seattle part of the time, going back and forth between his home and the ACLU. But we didn't have that much time in the same place, so we'd go on trips and I'd edit together scenes and send them out to the group for discussion. And I knew if I could get Jeff to tear up with something he already knew was going to happen, then I'd done something right. It was my litmus test.
And lots of Kleenex, lots of Kleenex.
So we'd go out, we'd film, we'd edit things together, I'd send them out, and we'd have conversations about it. So we knew a little bit about the direction the project was taking as we went. And then we'd finished the majority of our shooting at the onset of the pandemic, although in all honesty, we would have kept shooting. We might still be shooting. We might not have really dived into editing as much as we would have liked at this point. But there's just so much history, and you know, we really were enjoying the process so much that it was a shame to have to stop shooting. But we did do one interview with Mother Randall, one of the last surviving victims of the Tulsa massacre during the pandemic. And then Sarah and I were together during the pandemic in upstate New York, well, during the first wave. And it put us in a little creative bubble, which was nice. We got to spend a lot more time together, every day together, working on this. And it's something we wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. So that was really nice.
One of the things that I have really appreciated is the way that, you know, Sarah, you and Emily have addressed head on sort of the elephant in the room, which is why are we telling this story? Why, was this entrusted into our hands? And so I'd love if you could speak to that for a minute, because there is this real sense in this country that when talking about race, there is a responsibility that is carried by Black Americans or other people of color. There is a different responsibility that is carried by white Americans, and sort of never the twain shall meet. And some things should be handled by one group, some things should be handled by another group. And is it appropriate, for one community to take on certain kinds of work? And it's not a question that you've shied away from. You have, you've been very explicit about, like, this is why we felt a project needed to be done, and how we made sure that we remained conscious throughout, of who we were and what we brought to the story. So I'd love if you could, speak to that a little bit, for the women in film audience watching this. And then Jeff, after that, I'd love for you to talk about, why you knew this was the team that you could work with to tell this story.
Sure. Well, Emily and I are white women, and we made a film about the history of anti-Black racism in America in partnership with Jeffery Robinson. It's hard. I think it's important, and I know this is maybe what Jeff speaks about too, but I think it is really important that this film was a partnership between white and Black Americans. This story is not a Black story, right? The history of anti-Black racism in America is a history of white of white supremacy, of white inaction, of white tolerance of a status quo. It's a history of Black survival and Black resistance. I mean, it's also a history of some white resistance, because not all white people supported the status quo, but it is our history as a country. And it is not the responsibility of Black Americans to remind us that slavery happened and that white supremacy exists and that racism continues to exist. It is all of our responsibility to reckon with that history. And one of the arguments of the film and of Jeffrey's talk is that precisely why we are where we are right now is because of a refusal or inability to reckon with, talk about, struggle with these issues. And it is only by talking about them, owning up to this history as a white person, reckoning with this history as a nation together, that we can get through it. I mean, it is, slavery in this country is an open wound that hasn't healed. And nothing we've done so far has, or the nothing that we've done, rather, I can't say we've done all that much. The nothing that we've done to address it hasn't gotten us very far. Emily and I are white women. We are the parents of white children. We hope that our children that we will leave a country for them and a world that is different than the one that they were born into. So we feel a responsibility to be a part of that change. I think one of the interesting things of making this film together as a team is that we had a lot of conversations about what we were doing, the intentionality with which we were doing it, how we were doing it, authorship and voice and agency. And, I don't always get those things right. I get those things wrong a lot. And I think that as a white person, that what I want to say to other white people is that it's okay to get this wrong. What's important to is not to be silent about it. And that it is engaging with each other, with people that look like me, with people who don't look like me. It's finding a way to speak about racism, anti-Black racism in America is so urgent, because otherwise it's just this invisible thing that hangs over everything, and we don't know how to articulate it, and we don't know how to deal with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Jeff, do you want to talk about, what those initial conversations were like when you thought, like, yes, you know what?
I will. One thing I just want to say to pick up on what Sarah was just saying is that I have met Sarah and Emily's children. They know who I am. Emily's son, Goose, is like, hey, mom, that's that guy that's on TV all the time, because he's seen the editing process. They will grow up having seen their mothers engaged in making this film. It will change the way they see the world. There's no question in my mind about that. I wasn't looking to make a movie. I was a criminal defense lawyer when I started doing this research, and I started doing this presentation because of the rampant racism in the criminal legal system in America. And at the beginning, those were most of my audiences: prosecutors, police officers, criminal defense lawyers, judges. And I wasn't looking to make a movie. I was at the ACLU. I was a deputy legal director leading their work on reform in the criminal legal system and fighting racism. And I was giving this talk because I had been giving it before I even came to the ACLU. And Sarah just happened to be in the room. And quite frankly, that day was probably one of the luckiest days of my life, because this wouldn't have happened if Sarah hadn't been in that room. And we were doing some searching of our emails a couple of weeks ago, or at the end of last year, and we determined that we first met on June 20th, 2017. And on Juneteenth, 2018, 364 days later, we were in town hall filming the backbone of the film. And when they first said, we want to make a film, I was just laughing. And I wasn't trying to be insulting, but I thought that's really nice and it's complimentary, but that's crazy. I knew their name, I knew their family and what their family represented, but I didn't know them. So I started talking to people about Sarah, because I'm a criminal defense lawyer and so is she. And so I knew people that knew her. And I watched the film that they made about their father. And as we kept talking to each other, what was clear to me is that their goals were the same as my goals. And what was really important to me is that the story was going to be my story, the story that I had worked on. I knew what I wanted to say. And it's not saying I didn't want input from folks on, you could do that better, or you might take a slightly different tack. But at the end of the day, I didn't want anybody telling me what to say. And they never once came close to doing that. They came to me saying, you will own the film at the end of the process. And every person I've talked to since, I got into this, and now that the film is being distributed by Sony Pictures Classics, all the people that you talk to, they kind of take me aside and go, how did this work out? You can't own this film. And people were saying to me, are you sure you own the film? And I'm kind of thinking to myself, look, I don't know movies, but I'm not an idiot. I know what the word OWN means. And Sarah and Emily and I have talked about it. And I trust them because of the way we have talked about it. And then they delivered on everything they said they would do. So I am thrilled at this collaboration. I don't know that someone other than Sarah and Emily could have helped me make the film that we put together. All of us have put so much into this. And so I cherish the relationship. The work on this film has been fantastic. And this ain't the last thing you'll see from the three of us.
I love it. I love it. I started this conversation by talking about a particular image from the film that really stuck with me. And I want to end with another, which was the scene, Jeff, when you are reconnecting or having a conversation with your childhood friend Opie, and coach from your school, and he relates the story about this tournament that you went to, and shares some information with you that you had not heard before. And you reveal that during the course of playing this game, an opposing player had called you a nigger, and your father, who was seated on the bench, says to you, what do you want to do about it? Do you want to cry or do you want to keep playing? And you have to make a decision in that moment, and you want to keep playing. But the anguish as you relive that moment was so affecting. And again, I'm watching this as a Black woman, and I'm thinking, when do we make space for the grief that Black people have to carry? It is unfair. There is no justice in the fact that a child, a young person in that moment, could not take the time, first, that you had to deal with that at all, but that, you are asked to move out of that moment and to keep working, keep moving. We ask so much of people of color in this country. We ask so much of Black people, these descendants of the enslaved in this country. So that's a moment that really stuck with me. That was just so beautifully and quietly presented. But I would love to hear from you, as we move to wrap up, about the scenes in this film or the stories in this film that were particularly affecting for you, things that really stuck with you long after the filming and the editing was complete. So Jeff, why don't we start with you?
I think all of this is going to stick with me for the rest of my life. The two things that you mentioned, the Black police officers in Memphis. There are many, many Black police officers in Memphis. Memphis is a majority Black city. And yet, as you said, those officers were protecting the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue. And one of the things that's not in the film is that as we were interviewing County Commissioner Tammy Sawyer in front of the pedestal where the statue had been taken down, as soon as we showed up at that pedestal and the cameras came out, there were police cars on three corners that just sat and watched us the entire, and Tammy's like, oh, here they come. And, I was enraged as I was talking to her and trying to make sure that that didn't come through, because I just wanted to start walking toward them with the camera and saying, what the F are you doing? What is this? Why are you watching us? What is it that what is it you're trying to do? The thing I will say about Dick Orients, my coach, is that he was 10 years older than Opie and I. I was born in August and Opie was born in September. So we were always like two of the younger kids in our class. Dick was 10 years older than us. And that incident happened. We were still trying to pinpoint it. We think it was either 1967 or 1968, but it was when we were in the 5th or 6th grade. I hadn't spoken to Opie or Dick in decades. I think I saw Dick once when I went home to Memphis and I stopped by the school and, we hugged each other. And yet, 50 years later, he was crying about it. And so it was interesting to me when we talk about how this damages all of us. 50 years later, this guy is still torn up about what happened. And the thing that I focus on there is that at 21 years old, just a couple of years after civil rights workers get disappeared in Mississippi for talking about equality, he had the guts to do what he did. I had no idea how he did that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Emily, Sarah, what are moments that stick with you?
Well, when we were traveling across the country together, every time we finished an interview, every time we met with someone new, we would leave and we'd all turn to each other and say, that was amazing. That was the best interview we've done so far. And they all felt like that. It was a very powerful experience. One of the more powerful trips we took, and maybe because we took multiple trips there, was the time we spent when we went to Tulsa. We ended up going there on 2 separate occasions, and we really built some very close bonds with community members and activists there, and who we built trust with, and we were welcomed in, and we learned a lot from them. And that was a very unique and special experience. So I would have to say that the time we spent in Tulsa, definitely, and the being brought to the stairs to nowhere, the steps to nowhere. I just, never having even imagined that a place like that exists or is maintained. It was chilling to see them. It really blew us all away.
Sarah?
To build on what Emily's saying about the stairs to nowhere, I think as a team, ultimately, the making of this film became a lot about monuments, right? Both, monuments seen and unseen, known and unknown, and the power of those monuments. Tammy Sawyer talks about the effect of the Confederate monuments on Black children, right? And how they have to wonder why is this important, and why this is raised up in our city. And we look at platforms like the Stairs to Nowhere, for which there is no placard, nothing, no historical marker, nothing to tell you what it is, but it persists. And it persists just like the handprints of the enslaved people that built Charleston persist, the fingerprints, it's all right there. That it's history
that Joe Bowling had to put up
Right.
for her father, that she can't get on the National Registry of Monuments.
Right.
Absolutely. Or, the Senator Sanders talking about how every time anyone drives over the Edmund Pettus Bridge, it gets in them, right? Just the power of that symbolism, how much more power that has than words, right? The physical power of monument. And I think ultimately the fact that all of this history is still here, right? Despite any efforts to erase it or hide it or pretend it didn't exist or it never happened or it doesn't mean, it's still there and it still means. And we still together have an enormous opportunity to reclaim it and hold it up.
You speak to one of the survivors, one of the few remaining survivors of the Tulsa massacre. She says, "I thought the world was ending. I hope to never see anything like that ever again." And there's a pause and she says, "But you never know." It is the work of all of us to ensure that nothing like that ever happens again. I thank you for the incredibly valuable, the crucial work that you have done on this film. I honor that work. I thank you so much for joining us today for this conversation. I hope that those of you watching this conversation have seen the film. If not, please go check it out. You will be absolutely blown away and edified by what you've seen. So thank you, Jeffery Robinson, Emily Kunstler, Sarah Kunstler, for joining me today to talk about Who We Are, A Chronicle of Racism in America. Thank you.